Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shakol hi b'divaro. We say a blessing, we drink the water, we're ready to go. My pals, we're going on a journey with today's class. This is going to be really fun. As always, before we start, please make a comment, hit the like button, share, signal to Facebook. We're doing something important, lighting up the social media darkness. And tonight's going to be amazing. This is going to be such a journey. You're going to get a real feeling for how the Talmud works, how our sages move from one topic to another. And tonight, we're going to be discussing what the dead talk about. This is going to blow your socks off. This is really a terrific daf. So who's in the house? And where are we tuning in from? There we go. Carolyn gets it. Carolyn Cameron says she's in from Indiana. Who else is in the house? I'm in New York City, Upper West Side. Had a wonderful day today. I'm touring colleges with my daughter. We were out at Princeton. And what a beautiful, beautiful campus that is. Had a really lovely morning with Rabbi Eitan Webb, the Chabad rabbi there at Princeton. He showed us around. Got to know some of the students who are in the midst of exams. So I wish them all luck, all the lovely people that we met today. And it was a great journey. Molly and I are having a great time. Augusto Martin from Miramar, Florida. Enrique Mas, welcome to New York. Ivan in Las Vegas. James in Indianapolis. Andrea in Mississippi. Wonderful. Keep doing it. Tell me what city you're in, who's in the house. Also, yesterday I challenged people to greet, right? So we keep running into that the sages place a very high value on being friendly, on greeting people, on being the first to greet someone. I did it today. I made sure to say hello to people, to strangers. If there was a chance they were going to greet me, I made sure I greeted them first. I surprised a few people. So the ones who committed yesterday on our show to say, today you were going to greet somebody, did you do it? Did you do it? Nancy says, no socks on in Chandler. I've already blown your socks off. That's great. So let us know if you committed to be friendly and to greet people as our sages advise yesterday. Did you do it today? Right? And if you didn't do it today, so you have another chance tomorrow. There's always another chance to make this improvement. And as we say, making improvement in our personal attributes is the hardest and most important work there is. Those who would change the world must be ready to change themselves first. Nina's in the house from LA. She's about to share it with the Accidental Talmudist Forum. If you haven't already joined the forum, it's our Facebook group, easily found, Accidental Talmudist Forum. And then you'll be sure to get notified not only about our live shows, but every post that Nina and I put out there, we share to the forum first. And the Facebook algorithms are such that groups, get notified much more reliably than pages. Okay, and James says, sure did. He fulfilled the commitment that he made yesterday. Fantastic. All right, my pals, we are on Berachos 18, Daf 18, Yud Chet. We're just opening the third chapter of the first tractate of the Talmud. And in the first two, we covered when and until when we say the Shema, the daily Shema. And what do we do? In the second chapter, we covered a bunch of things related to what do we do if we're interrupted when we're reciting the daily prayer. And now in chapter 3, we're going to look at some other obstacles to fulfilling our daily obligation, things that are beyond our control, like what if we're in a state of mourning? What if there's something unseemly going on nearby? What if there's actually something filthy nearby? What if we're talking about a case of ritual impurity known as tuma? We'll get to that later. But one of the biggest sources of ritual impurity, meaning not that we've done something wrong, but we're just in a situation that has to be addressed, and we can't do certain practices, including reciting the daily prayer, when we're in this state. And one of those is when we're near a dead body, right? So we open chapter 3 with a Mishnah, right? So one of the older teachings passed down in the oral tradition that says if there is a mourner, right? So you have lost, God forbid, a loved one, and the body is before you, right? So, those of us who have had a family member die, and we saw the family member die, we were present for that. In the normal course of things, it can certainly happen that a beloved grandparent or great-grandparent reaches the end, and you're there. So now there's a dead body there, okay? We want to get the body buried as soon as possible. In Jewish tradition, we try to get that body in the ground within 24 hours, if possible. But while the body is there before the mourner, right, literally in the same room with the mourner, can the mourner say the Shema? Answer, he is exempt. He is exempt from reciting the daily Shema. Unclear if he's prohibited to say it, but he is certainly exempt. He's got other things on his mind, probably even prohibited from saying it right in the room and within a short space. So that's the Mishnah. He is exempt. And let me just get the exact wording on that. One whose deceased relative is laid out unburied before him is exempt from the recitation of the Shema, and not only the Shema, but also the Amidah, the standing prayer, from donning tefillin, and from all the positive mitzvahs that are mentioned in the Torah. Now, there's some other stuff in that Mishnah, but as we go on this journey of understanding how this, how the Talmudic sage's mind works, we're going to just stick to a kind of through line as best as we can. So now the Mishnah says he's exempt while the body is before him. Now we enter the Gemara. So it's the next level of commentary that starts a few hundred years later. And in the Gemara, it says that the sages bring down a teaching known as a baraita, or a baraisa, if you're pronouncing it in the Ashkenaz style. So a baraisa is a teaching as old as a Mishnah, but that didn't make it into the very dense and sort of abbreviated set of teachings known as the Mishnah. It's a teaching as old as the Mishnah, could be very authoritative, but didn't get into the Mishnah, and often has differences from the Mishnah, so that there seems to be a contradiction. And now our sages will study, well, what's the difference between this Mishnah and this Baraisa? Okay, so in the Baraisa, we have a similar idea, and this is that if there is a mourner and there's a dead body in the house, so the mourner is not going to eat in front of the body. And this makes sense for a lot of reasons, right? You don't want to eat right in front of the dead body. So if there's a dead body in the house, the mourner should go eat somewhere else, in another house. What if there's no other house he can go to? He doesn't have a friend with a house. There's no neighbor who's opening his home to him. He lives far away, so he can't go to another house. Okay, so then he should go to another room. What if there's no other room? So then he should make a partition between himself and the dead body. What if there's no material around to make a partition? So at the very least, he should turn away. Now that's a teaching in a baraisa. These teachings seem to be related, but certainly there's no contradiction between them. One, he's exempt from prayer while there's a dead body in front of him. And in the other, if he's eating, he should get out of the house and go somewhere else. But if he can't do that, he should at the very least turn away from the dead body. And by the way, that's unless it's Shabbat, right? So along with this teaching that he should turn away, if he can't get to another place, he also is exempt when he eats from reciting the grace after meals. Not only is he exempt from reciting it, he also doesn't participate when somebody else is reciting the grace after meals. He might eat with other people, and they are obligated to recite the grace after meals, but he is exempt from reciting it, and he doesn't join in their group rendition of it, called a zimun, when three men eat together. And he is also exempt, says the Baraisa, from Shema, reciting the Shema and the Amidah, and putting on tefillin and all the other mitzvahs, unless it's Shabbat. If it's Shabbat, so then some of these rules change, because Shabbat overrides a lot of these strictures, even having to do with the dead body. The key is, and here's the contradiction that they're pointing to, it's not about the Shabbat exception. The issue is that since he was told he should go somewhere else, right? Now the body is no longer in front of him. He's in another house, ideally. He might have had to just turn away. But ideally, he's in another house, or at least in another room. So the body is no longer in front of him, but according to the Baraisa, he remains exempt from reciting the Shema and the Amidah and putting on the Tefillin and all the other positive mitzvahs that are mentioned in the Torah. So that's a contradiction, because in the Mishnah it said that he's exempt because the body is before him. And now we're being told he's exempt because he's in a state of mourning, even if the body is not in front of him. He's still exempt if he's somewhere else. So now that we have found this contradiction, so the sages have to explain the contradiction. And what they always are trying to do is to say, well, it's not really a contradiction. It's just that there's a little bit more information that's not being spelled out here, and now we're going to fill in that information, right? So one explanation is, well, perhaps the Mishnah does not mean literally that the corpse is before him. Perhaps the Mishnah means that he is in a state of mourning, similar to what the Baraisa is implying. He's in that state. He has just lost a loved one. The loved one has not been buried yet, but he's not necessarily in the same room with the body. And as proof of that, they look at Abraham when he lost his wife Sarah. And in the Torah, it mentions that he rises up from his grief as if the body is before him. But we know that he's already away from her, and he's having a negotiation about buying a burial plot for her, and that will eventually become the modern city of Hebron, where that burial plot still is, the cave of Machpelah. But he's not right in front of her dead body when he's negotiating with the people to buy that cave, and so that might give support to this idea to explain away the contradiction. However, the sages don't let it rest at that. Now, in order to understand the possible contradiction, they bring in some new cases. And now we look at the case of a shomer. So, when a Jew dies, we want to get that body into the ground as soon as possible, by the next day, if possible. But between now, when the person died, and when they get in the ground, hopefully by tomorrow, the next day, sometimes even the same day, occasionally, it might even have to go till the second day after, for extenuating circumstances. But what we don't do is leave the body alone. Right? So Jewish tradition says that a dead body is never left alone. And so there's what's called a burial society, a Hevra Kadisha, right, the Holy Brotherhood, who will take charge and make sure that there is a person, literally, standing by the body. So the body is never left unattended. This is the kind of love and respect that we have for the vessel, the body, which carried the soul throughout a lifetime. Just because the person is dead, we don't, disrespect the body that carried that soul through this world. And we respect it so much that we make sure it is never left unguarded. And so these shomrim, these shomers, these guards, as it were, the people who will sit with the body, will stay with it all night long, often reading psalms to the dead person. It would be too much to ask for the family members to do this, and so that's why every city with a Jewish community of any good size, has this kind of burial society that will undertake that duty. Now, the person, the shomer, who is sitting with the body, is not related to the deceased, not related to the dead person. He's not having an emotional connection that would prevent him from reciting the Shema. Nevertheless, he is exempt. He is exempt from reciting the Shema, from saying the Amidah, from putting on Tefillin, and from all other positive mitzvahs mentioned in the Torah. Why is he exempt? It's not because he's having that emotional connection. It's because he's right next to that body. How close? We'll say, within 4 cubits is the measure that's often given. Or some say in the same room with the body. So he's exempt. But if there are two guards of the body, so one can stay with the body and the other can go somewhere else and say Shema and say their daily prayer, the Amidah, and put on tefillin and do other mitzvahs, other commandments in which he is obligated, right? So it's not the relationship and it's not the status, it's the fact that they're in front of the body that causes this. So now we're still trying to reconcile, well, what was the Mishnah originally about? Is it only when you're in front of the body, or is it because you have a relationship with the dead person? So now we bring in some more cases to help us understand. Like I said, we're going on a journey in order to understand this Mishnah, and we're going to go to some really interesting places. So now we have a teaching that one who sees a funeral procession go by, right? And remember, in ancient times, it's not like you're standing in the street and, a hearse and a bunch of cars go by. It's that you live in a small town and now you see a bunch of people walking, carrying the dead body and taking it to its burial plot. By the way, in the old days, they didn't dig a hole in the ground. They would routinely take people to a crypt, to some kind of a cave, where they would lay the body in a kind of nook in the rock wall. That was the kind of burial system, as it were, in ancient times. But at any rate, when they were taking this body through the town to the funeral, so you would obviously stop and pay your respects and be respectful as the funeral procession walks by, but our sages teach that is not enough. If a funeral procession goes by you, and you don't join the procession, so you have committed a transgression, and the nature of that transgression is that you mock the dead. You mock the dead. You don't care about them. You think that this is just a body going by and it's unimportant, and you don't do your duty. What is your duty? To join the funeral procession. Attending to the dead, literally attending the dead, going along with them to their burial, is considered one of the great mitzvahs, one of the great commandments. There's no limit to how often and when we're supposed to do that. And it is also called the true kindness, because the dead cannot return the favor. So if a funeral procession goes by, you need to join it. You do not need to join it all the way to the cemetery. You just need to join it for a short way so that you were part of the procession. How far? It's actually very short. That same measurement, 4 cubits. What's a cubit? About from the elbow to the fingertip, about 1.5 feet. So you just have to go along with the funeral procession for a minimum of 6 feet, 2 steps, right? Just take 2 steps with the procession to show that you understand how important it is to accompany the dead and to join that procession. While we're on the subject of mocking the dead, or refraining from mocking the dead, making sure that we do not mock the dead, we have some more teachings. One is that when we are transporting bones, one who is transporting bones. So, for example, the body was in that cave for a few years, all the flesh has gone away, and only the bones are left. Who's an example of that? Joseph. This is the Torah portions that we're reading right now, right? The whole journey into Egypt, and we were slaves in Egypt, and eventually Moses comes along and, brings the plagues to Pharaoh, and eventually Pharaoh allows the people to leave. Right? Moses says, "Let my people go." Eventually, it's going to take many weeks, but we're going to get there, and the Jews in the yearly Torah cycle are going to leave Egypt. And when the children of Israel leave Egypt, freed from their slavery, go out into the desert, receive Torah, etc., so they're going to carry the bones of Joseph out of Egypt and return them so that they can be buried in Israel, right, in the land of Israel. So these bones are not a fresh corpse. There's no doubt that this is not the dead is right before you, like a dead body. This is somebody died long, long ago, and you're just carrying the bones, right? So it would seem to have very little connection to the dead as we think of them, a dead body, a corpse, right? Nevertheless, we're taught that those bones are treated with the same kind of deference and respect as we give a Torah scroll. Right? What's a Torah scroll? I mean, it's the holiest object in the Jewish world. Right? We treat it with reverence. It's the book that contains the teachings of God, the law, and we treat all our Torahs with great, great reverence and love. And we accord that same reverence, respect, love, loving care when we transport bones, even though they might be the bones of somebody who died long, long ago. This leads to a discussion between Rabbi Chaya and Rabbi Jonathan, Jonathan, right? So Chaya and Jonathan. Chaya and Jonathan, two rabbis, are arguing about what happens because they're walking through a cemetery, and now, right, so this is my garment here, this is my tzitzis that I wear in a garment under my clothing, right? In those days, they attached tzitzis to their outer clothing. They didn't wear pants and shirts and sweaters, right? What they wore was more like a big poncho. Just imagine like a large rectangular garment with a hole in the center. You put it over your whole body, right? Tie it in the middle. And that big rectangular garment with a hole in the middle for your head has four corners, and you attach the fringes, these ritual fringes, to each of those four corners. But it's a long garment, so those fringes are quite near the ground, possibly even dragging along the ground. When they walk through a cemetery, Rabbi Chaya says to Rabbi Jonathan, you can't allow your fringes to drag over the graves. Like, you need to tuck that in or wear a different garment, right? Not with the fringes. Rabbi Jonathan's very attached to both his clothing and the fringes on them, and he's like, I'm not going to change that. It doesn't matter because the dead don't know what's going on. Now, why does Chaya say you can't drag your fringes over the graves of the dead? Why? Because the fringes are a commandment. We've been learning. This is in the Shema. This is in the daily prayer. Right? So God says to Moses, say to the children of Israel, you'll put fringes on the corners of your garments. You'll put a blue thread in the fringe so that whenever you look at the fringe, you'll be reminded of all my commandments and to be holy to the Lord your God. It's a very important commandment. We say it at least twice a day. So Jonathan's like, hey, I don't want to take them off. I don't want to change it. I don't want to make a change. Why should I? The dead don't know that I'm walking over, that my tzitzis are going over their grave. I'm sorry, to finish. It's a commandment that we wear the fringes. The dead, because they're dead, cannot fulfill that commandment. So this idea of mocking the dead, right? If you wear fringes in front of people who are not able to fulfill the commandment that you're fulfilling at that moment, it's like you're making fun of them, right? It's like you're not sensitive to the fact that you can fulfill the commandment and they can't. So Reb Chaya says, don't flaunt the fact that you can fulfill the commandment of tzitzis when we're walking through the cemetery among people who can't observe that commandment. And Yonatan's answer is, they don't know. They're dead. Right? And his proof is from a text, a line in Ecclesiastes, where it says, the dead do not know. Literally, the dead do not know. So Rabbi Chaya says to Rabbi Jonathan, if you think that the verse, the dead do not know, means that they don't know what we're doing in this world and that you're right now walking over their graves and flaunting that you can wear tzitzis and observe the commandment of tzitzis and they can't. If you think that the line, the dead do not know, applies to this situation, so then the first time that you read that verse and they taught it to you, you didn't get it. And the second time you read that verse and it was taught to you, you didn't get it. And the third time you read that verse and it was taught to you, you didn't get it. Or if somebody taught it to you and you got the teaching, they taught it to you bad because you have missed the point, says Rabbi Chaya. And he says to Jonathan, what it means, the dead do not know, is that the wicked in this world who behave wickedly and who are headed, for a bad position in the next world, so even while they're in this world and they're alive, they're like dead, they're like already dead. Right? The wicked are like the dead even in this world before they're dead, whereas the righteous will live forever and have a great place in the world to come. That's what that line means, Jonathan, right? That's what Chaya says to him. the Gemara continues, right? We sort of leave that story where it was. Yonatan may or may not have been convinced, but now we add another story to help us understand this. And it's actually about the sons of Rabbi Chaya, the one who said to Yonatan, you didn't get it. The sons of Rabbi Chaya, after Chaya has died, so it's a little bit later, right? The Gemara is constantly moving forward and backward in history, and even among the historical periods of the sages, because the sages were active for 700 years. So there's constantly conversations going on, or almost imagined conversations going on through time, as people in the present and the past, and the future of that whole Talmudic period will sort of be presented as arguing with each other. So the sons of Rabbi Chaya, after Chaya is gone, I think they're traveling somewhere. They're doing some work. I think they were actually somewhat wealthy. They owned a big business, and they had to travel somewhere away from town to supervise some of their laborers out in the field. And while they're out there and don't have access to other sages and teaching in the house of study, there's a law that they're trying to remember that they learned from their father, and they can't remember it. It's just escaped their memory, and they can't get it. No matter how hard they try, they cannot remember that teaching of their fathers. And it's causing them anguish, because they really need to know this law, and they're just so upset that they can't remember it, and there's no internet and no smartphone, and they can't look it up. And so, since they can't look it up on the internet, they say, do you think that Father knows of our anguish? Does our Father realize how upset we are that we can't remember that law? Maybe he could communicate it to us in a dream or something, if we pray to him to help us, but does he know how anguished we are, right? And they remember some teachings that might address this, and one of them is that the soul feels the pain of the body decomposing. They have a teaching for that, right? That when, during that first year that the body's in the ground and having the majority of its decomposition happening, so the soul is aware that the body that it rode around in throughout its whole lifetime is now rotting away, and that causes the soul pain to know that the body is rotting away. So they say, well, so clearly the soul knows of what's going on in this world if it feels the pain of the body rotting away. But then they say, well, but that's not a proof, because maybe the soul feels its own body rotting away because it's still connected to that body. There's that portion of the soul that remains with the body at the burial place, while the rest of the soul, as it were, is in the world of souls. So this is not a proof. So they need more evidence. The Gemara needs more evidence. That story doesn't cover it. So then another story is brought down to help us understand and to answer, do we mock the dead by wearing our tzitzis in a cemetery? Because the question is, do they know that we're fulfilling a mitzvah in their presence that they cannot fulfill? So a story is told about a man who gave a lot of money to charity during Rosh Hashanah. He helped somebody that needed it, and his wife was angry with him because she says, we're not so rich that you can give away so much money to the needy. You're going to make us needy. You can't give away that much money. It was inappropriate. And he's like, well, but they needed it. It was the right thing to do. And she says, no, you did the wrong thing. And she's so angry that she stays on him, telling him that he did the wrong thing, and keeps telling him that he did the wrong thing, and eventually drives him out of the house, just to get some sleep. And he goes to sleep outside the house, and he kind of in the dark wanders into a field and doesn't realize that he's wandered into a cemetery. So now he's sleeping among the dead. And while he's out in that field at night and realizes, whether it's in a dream or just in that waking state among the dead, he overhears a conversation among two dead people. And the dead people are actually talking about what's going on in the world. And through this conversation, this guy who gave away too much money to charity learns that some trouble is coming to the world in the form of bad weather. And it's weather that's going to affect the farmers, right? And the farmers who plant, everyone who's planting at the regular time this year is going to have a huge problem. they need to. In the first case they should have planted early. They should plant late. Everybody plants at the regular time, but they should have planted later. And because he overhears that this trouble is coming, he says, well, maybe there's something to this. So he plants during the second planting season instead of the first, the standard planting season. And everybody who plants first in the early season that year, which is to say everybody, loses so much of their crop and their investment. And our guy who overheard this weather information in the cemetery at night, has the better knowledge, plants later, his crop is saved. And, now there's scarcity, and he actually makes a bundle of money, much more than what he gave away to charity at Rosh Hashanah. The next year, he goes at around the same time to sleep in that cemetery and overhears the same kind of information again. But last year everyone saw that he, by planting second, made a lot of money, and they all planted too early. So the second year everybody plants late, but he hears that there's a different kind of problem coming, maybe like some kind of plant disease, a blight, and that you need to plant early. So he plants early. His crop is saved. Everybody else has huge problems, and he gets even richer the second year. By the third year, it doesn't work anymore because the spirits in that graveyard who were being overheard, they weren't telling him this stuff on purpose. He just overheard them talking. But by the third year, they realize that somebody's been overhearing them, and they don't share the information anymore, so that he doesn't get that knowledge anymore. And so now the sages say, so these stories that we've heard prove that the dead do know what's going on in this world. But then there's a doubt. That, well, maybe that story is true, maybe it's not. Maybe what's going on in that story is that there's an angel who's empowered to share certain kinds of information and not others, at certain times and not others. And we don't really have proof that the dead know. But then two more stories are brought down about very righteous rabbis. One is about Zeiri, and another is Shmuel, a very famous sage. And in two cases, these rabbis were entrusted with important funds for charity. But the person who was watching the money for them, a trusted servant in the case of Zeiri, or Shmuel's father in the case of Shmuel, and then they died, suddenly. There was just a sudden death, and the person who knew where these important funds were is now gone, and they can't find it. And so actually now these rabbis are being accused of stealing money that was meant for charity because it can't be found. They're like, well, no, I entrusted it to my trusted servant, and then that person died. Or I entrusted it to my father, who was very trusted, but then he died. And they're like, yeah, well, where's the money? And they're like, but we don't know because the maid died in the case of Zeri, or the father died in the case of Shmuel. But in both cases, they were able to sort of pray and ask the dead one, say, look, I really need you to communicate to me where that money is. It's not for me. It's money that's intended for charity. Please get word to me where that money is hidden. And in both cases, the information came and the money was found. And so based on those stories, Rabbi Yonatan says, okay, that proves it for me. I'm with you. And maybe was it that story in particular, or was it just other similar stories? In either case, Rabbi Yonatan revised his opinion and said, you know what, we don't wear our tzitzis out in a cemetery, right? We don't wear that garment, or we tuck them in. We don't flaunt tzitzis in front of the dead. And indeed, the halacha, the law, is that in terms of a talit, right, so a prayer shawl that has a tzitzis on it, we don't put that on in a cemetery. If we wear a garment, an outer garment that has tzitzis attached to it, so we find a way to tuck that in or wear something else. In the case of tzitzis like mine, which is much more standard these days, it's that worn under a garment, but some people wear it out. Some people wear tzitzis tucked in their pants, and some people wear it out where it visibly reminds them to fulfill commandments, which is what tzitzis are supposed to do. So people who wear their tzitzis out, which I do sometimes, not other times. I like having mine out, but it isn't always appropriate. But if you're wearing them out and then you step into a cemetery, so you tuck them in. You put them in so that you will not mock the dead. You will not flaunt your observance of fringes in the cemetery. Also in the cemetery, you don't recite the Shema. You don't say the Amidah. You don't put on tefillin. You don't read from a Torah scroll. And if you sort of are in a situation where you have to do that, you have to make sure that you're at, more than 4 cubits away from any grave. And this has been the journey that we went on with our sages in trying to understand the contradiction between the one who said that the mourner does not recite the Shema when the dead is before him, and the Baraita, which says he doesn't recite the Shema even if he's somewhere else because he's in the period of mourning. So that applies to the mourner. But even for one who is not the mourner but is near the dead, he's exempt from those obligations. Shema, Amidah, Tefillin, and all other positive mitzvahs mentioned in the Torah. Okay, that was a journey. I have not been looking at these comments closely, but I'm sorry, I'm replying to Ivan Bowman, so sorry for the loss of your mom. Oh, Ivan, Baruch Dayan Emet, I'm so sorry to hear this news. May your mother's memory always be for a blessing. I didn't see when that news came in. We extend you the condolences of our whole community. Not sure what the situation was, but even if it was sudden, it's so terrible and so difficult. And if it was something that was coming for a long time, it's still incredibly difficult. Folks, if you have any questions about what the journey that we've just taken, put them in the comments. Oh, here's Ivan. I just lost my mom. This is hard for me. I'm so sorry, Ivan. I'm so sorry. I don't know if you're still watching. But one is never ready. One is never ready. My father's a very close friend whose husband had dementia for many years. She wasn't able to communicate with him for many years. She knew that this end was coming for a long time. But then when it came, you're not prepared. No matter how prepared you are, you're not prepared. Death is the hardest thing. And so we really extend the condolences of our community. If anyone has some questions on the subject, let me know soon. Otherwise, we do try to look at the comments later. This show is really a blessing, how this is working out. I did not know, I didn't plan that I was going to start a daily show. But when Daf Yomi repeated on January 5th, it was the Siyum in LA that I attended, and that was also the first day of the new cycle, I knew I was thinking about jumping in, and I said, yeah, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do Daf Yomi again. The same Talmud cycle that I fell into in 2005, and that's how I became the Accidental Talmudist. That's how I became accidental, became a Talmudist when I completed that cycle in 2012. I jumped in again now in 2020. And then I thought, why don't I just share every day the stuff that's really sticking out to me with this community and see how it goes. And I'm doing this live show every day. People are tuning in. A lot of people get to see it live because my life is the way it is. I can't tell you what time it's going to be every day, but my commitment is to go live every day. And then it'll be on the page. So even if you miss me live, you can see it during that, anytime. It remains on the page. But people are just trying to watch it within that same 24 hours so that they can go on our Daf Yomi. We can all go on this Daf Yomi journey together. And it's getting to be pretty regular, anywhere from 2,000 to 4,000 people attending this class every day. And what an incredible blessing that is for us as a community. This Accidental Talmudist community, as a community, is making this teaching available, to people around the world that don't have access to a Beis Midrash, to a house of study, to a regular Daf Yomi Shir, a regular, Talmud page of the day class. And as a group, it's fantastic what we're making possible. We've always called Accidental Talmudist, I may be the Accidental Talmudist, but we've called Accidental Talmudist a community. We have a nonprofit, the Accidental Talmudist Organization, and that's an organization that exists to serve this community. So I'm really grateful to everyone who supports our nonprofit, who makes this teaching possible. It's reaching more people than you can imagine and touching more lives than you can imagine. Anybody who would like to donate to our organization, it's easy to find the donate button on our website, accidentaltalmudist.org. Thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight. This is a little longer than we usually like to go, but I just wanted to take you on a kind of a journey of, just so you get this feeling of how the Talmud flows. A question comes up, a contradiction is identified, and we start to bring in other sources to explore that contradiction, to see if there really is a contradiction. And of course, digressions come up right and left, sometimes because we're talking about one sage or one question or the sayings of this person or related teachings, etc. But tonight's show, I think, gives you a feeling for the sort of ebb and flow of Talmudic discourse. Thank you for joining, my holy brothers and sisters. I look forward to resuming this conversation with page 19 of the first tractate, Berachos, God willing, tomorrow. All the best, and sending you love from New York's Upper West Side.